You're listening to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast with Matt Tomasi and can be found at borntokickass.com/episode 20.
Welcome to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast, where you're introduced to the most fascinating people on the planet. Learn the ingredients of greatness that you can apply to your life. And now your host, Matthew Tomasi.
Today's podcast is brought to you by audible.com. Get a free audiobook of your choice and a 30-day free trial by visiting borntokickass.com/audible. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. To download your free audiobook today, go to borntokickass.com/audible. Again, that's borntokickass.com/audible for your free audiobook. Do you know someone or know of someone who walks the walk and would like to hear them on the Born to Kick-Ass podcast? They can be from any field, but they need to have an inspiring story that will help to motivate others to achieve their own goals. If you do, please head over to borntokickass.com/suggest a guest and fill out the form. We'd love to hear from you. Masha Gordon has recently become the fastest woman to have ever completed the Explorers Grand Slam in under 8 months. This ultimate feat of physical and mental endurance comprises of summiting the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents, as well as trekking to both the North and South Poles. Masha conquered, in order, Kilimanjaro in Africa, Vinson Massif in Antarctica, the South Pole in Antarctica, Aconcagua in South America, Carstensz Pyramid in Australasia, Elbrus in Europe, the North Pole in the Arctic, Everest in Asia, and finally Denali in North America. As a mother of 2, Masha wants to inspire other women to take up challenges that were unimaginable to them before, and for girls to take up the practice of outdoor activities to build their self-confidence and mental resilience. Enjoy the interview. Masha Gordon, thanks for your time today and welcome to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast.
My pleasure, Matthew.
Now, congratulations on your incredible world record adventure. You've recently come back, I believe.
That's right. I've been back for a week after 7.5 months journey.
While I was researching about yourself, I hadn't actually seen or I wasn't aware of the term Explorers Grand Slam. I know that's sort of comprised of like the 7 summits and the 2 poles. Is that sort of what it is? Can you maybe tell us about the 7 summits? What is that?
Sure, absolutely. So I've set a female record in Explorers Grand Slam, which is an endurance challenge that has been completed by less than 50 people ever. And the challenge includes, as you pointed out, 7 summits, which is climbing the highest peak on every continent, and then skiing the last degree, in my case, the last degree to the South and North Pole. I became the fastest woman, and I beat the previous record of 11 months with a record of 7 months and 19 days.
It's absolutely incredible that humans can do these incredible adventures. How did you get into mountaineering? Can you maybe give us a background of, maybe where you grew up, and were you athletic growing up? And how did you get into mountaineering?
Sure, completely the opposite. Though I grew up in the mountains, I'm Russian by birth. I grew up in the Caucasus, beautiful place in the Russian mountains on the border with Georgia. Actually, very close to Elbrus, one of the 7 peaks. I was not athletic at all. I appreciated the outdoors, but I probably had negative body image when I was growing up as a girl. I told myself I wasn't great at this. I was very good at everything else. And, by default, I kind of learned this. And I think part of it was what I reference as learned helplessness. I've been probably told I wasn't great at that, or I've seen that, and I opted out. Though I've learned to ski in my 20s and did recreational skiing, I wasn't really athletic. In the early 30s, I couldn't run a mile. I didn't go to the gym. And I kind of did other things, arts and cinema. And, I had young kids at the time. And when I was on maternity leave, age 35, I've taken my family and relocated them for 6 months to Chamonix in France, the French Alps, to initially ski and be in the fresh air. And there I try to climb. I try a scramble. Someone suggested that that's a good way of getting fit, of getting back in shape. And I absolutely loved it. And I think what I really most loved was the sense of adventure. Because it didn't feel like a gym. It actually felt fairly easy because it wasn't probably something complicated at that time. It was the conversational pace. And that's why I think mountaineering is a fabulous way of getting people into sports, because you require initially a pretty low level of base fitness. But I fell in love with that sense of exhilaration and getting to the summit and feeling an extraordinary accomplishment. And also, at that time I worked in the city, the incredible, relaxation that comes from mindfulness. And, when you're focused the whole week on doing trades or on a company that is not performing, in my case, I was a fund manager, and you can't think about anything else. Then being, let's say, on the rock surface, you can't think about anything else but the next move up. And that intense focus on another activity gave incredible peace of mind. So that was 7 years ago. The journey journey of passion, gradually brought me to the level where I started going on expeditions and I started climbing more serious peaks. And obviously that brought me to the Explorers Grand Slam Challenge.
Now, just with your career, you held some pretty high positions. Were you in the finance industry?
That's right. I worked for Goldman Sachs for 12 years. I was managing director there. And then I worked for PIMCO, which is another money management firm. So in a way, I was a market athlete. I had that inner competitiveness in me. It just was directed at very, very different things.
And what sort of hours were you doing, like on average per day or per week? Were you doing like big hours?
Sure. Well, absolutely. I worked probably 12-hour days, and your day didn't end at work, right? So you were constantly attached to your digital device, and you were worrying about how markets open in Hong Kong or how they close in New York.
With your financial career, did you sort of hone some skills that could transfer to the mountaineering path?
I think it's more of it. Clearly, I tapped into mental endurance. And I think we all have that store of mental endurance by our late 30s, early 40s, particularly if you have been a career person, you've been a parent. So you have that ability of persevering through pain and going because you have to. But I think a more interesting aspect is decision making. And I, as an investor, you watch the market and you see why market disasters occur. And they occur because of the herd instinct, right? Because everyone kind of as lemmings, starts throwing themselves into the same decision of the cliff. In mountaineering, that's very, very common as well. If you look at K2 disasters, people died because someone said one morning, I think it's a good summit day, and went off. He probably was wrong, and then the others followed and encountered a storm, and there was a tragedy. So that type of group thing is very, very common, as well as things like confirmation bias. So we tend, as human beings, to accept or hear only information that agrees with our inner decision. And again, like to give you an example, it could be, well, I know it's been windy, so there are slabs, avalanche slabs potential in the hill. But hey, today is the sun shining, and I think it's all right. I'm going to only accept the sun is shining story. So in mountains are very, very much about risk mitigation, and it is about judgment. And I think that cognizance that I have of behavioral mistakes we make as humans, as I have seen that, and obviously made plenty of those myself as an investor, helped me to keep safe and also to accept certain decisions, such as turning back from a mountain when you're very close to the summit. It is indeed very, very painful to turn back.
You said you grew up, was it in the Caucasus region?
That's right.
What sort of altitude is that? Is that fairly high up, or is it sort of fairly close to sea level?
It's about 1,000-meter high, so it's not incredibly high, but clearly, when I was a kid, I was exposed to going hiking with my parents. I skied, again, in a very recreational fashion. And in the past few years, I spent a lot of time in Chamonix. And there, the altitude is about 1,500 meters. But very quickly, within 30 minutes, you could be at 4,000 meters on a lift. So that conditions you to altitude exposure and to being able to deal with that altitude.
Now, just with your growing up, you said that where you grew up was maybe about 1,000 meters above sea level. If you were sort of, throughout your childhood years, venturing into the mountains, do you think your body would have adapted to the altitude somewhat, or is that sort of still too low?
We don't have a 4,000 meter peak in a vicinity of, let's say, a couple of hours, right? It's not a question whether your body would have. There is a process of adapting your body, and it's by exposing it to altitude stress and coming down. Clearly, kids that grew up in Nepal are accustomed and adjusted. Kids in the West, there is, I suppose, a stigma and a question mark whether altitude is beneficial for children. So if, for example, you can't really climb Kilimanjaro until you are, I believe, 12 years old, and similar to other peaks. So there's no doubt I could have adjusted, but I would have had to follow the process that we follow to climbing high peaks.
Was there like a light bulb moment, or was there a particular time that you sort of remembered that, or how did you become aware of the grant, like either the 7 summits or the Explorers Grand Slam? When did that sort of come about in your mind? When did you sort of discover that?
Sure. So once I started climbing, I had this, I had a dream, and the dream was pretty conventional. The dream was to climb Everest. Ask any budding climber what's their objective, and they will show quite unimaginably. I guess they will point to the highest peak and say that one. So for me, it wasn't no different. And I thought of kind of that problem as an analytical problem. I said, well, what would it take, right? I clearly climbed. I was an ice climber, rock climber, but what would it take to climb the big one and come back alive? And I broke the problem down into pieces: cold management, high altitude, oxygen use. And when I switched to a portfolio career a couple of years ago and freed up more time to spend with my family and on my passion, I started going on, I started making baby steps in expedition world. So I went to Aconcagua, the highest peak in South America, for the first time. I've repeated it since. And I was to my great surprise, I was the only person who summited in the group. And that was my first encounter with high altitude. It's a 7,000 meter peak. And I've discovered that with the right regime or the right protocol of going up and down, even a novice can tolerate that and can tolerate that well. And I've also discovered that I actually was very good at that point of perseverance, of carrying through the pain. I had a very, very encouraging teammate and a guide who said, well, why don't you try, next step for you would be to try Denali. And again, like now, I've repeated this mountain through a much harder route this past June. But it was, again, a point of disbelief. Me carrying hauling sleds in Denali, the mountain for real men. It's the highest peak in North America. And again, to my surprise, I discovered I loved it. I loved the exertion and exhilaration. And it's okay, I cope with the sleds. So it kind of was a journey. And once you get on the journey, it's a very cohesive community of people who do 7 summits and, few people who then do the poles and complete Explorers Grand Slam. So it was very much a journey in preparation to Everest. Kind of as I was getting ready to complete the highest peak in Antarctica, Vinson, I thought, well, I'm so close to the poles. Why don't I try it? I'm here. I will regret it till the rest of my life if I don't try. And that kind of got me thinking, well, if I repeat 3 mountains, Elbrus, Aconcagua, and Denali, and ski to the North Pole, I can beat the record. And again, for someone incredible and athletic in her youth, this was a feat, right? And I thought, well, if I can do that, and actually I qualified for the Guinness record for the 7 summits as a result, wouldn't that be great? So it was kind of in a way a fun challenge against myself as someone who could never see herself doing any endurance challenge such as marathon or ultra race.
Just with the funding of this, are you sponsored or did you fund this yourself? You know, the full, the Grand Slam. How did you fund it?
So initially I funded it myself. I worked very, very hard my whole life. I came from no money, coming from the Soviet Union. And I think of this as endowment that I've created, for myself by working hard and not doing all these things, and which I now regret, right, in my 20s. For my last climb, I got sponsored by Sharpie, a fantastic company in the US, and we created this great program for their marker called Sharpie Extreme. My kids wrote beautiful messages on my equipment, and I took that equipment to Denali, and it really, really helped me cope with tougher conditions. So that sponsorship fee, which is quite substantial, I transferred that to my charity, Great and Rock, that I'm setting up to encourage teenage girls to develop their endurance through the use of outdoors.
Now, with the mountains, the first one for the actual Grand Slam, was that Kilimanjaro?
That's right. I had to decide in December where do I make the cutoff, right? I climbed Kili quickly in 24 hours after climbing an 8,000 meter peak in the prior few weeks. So I thought, well, I don't want to really repeat Kili. If I started in October, it provides me with plenty of time to beat handsomely the record of 11 months.
Can you maybe tell us what altitude sickness feels like, or when you get up to a certain point, maybe not like the summit of one of these mountains, but is there a certain point that you start to feel, the lack of oxygen, and what do you actually feel? What's that sort of sensation like? Well,
you feel it, I suppose, with the advance to any altitude above 4,000 meters. I remember my first encounter with altitude, and it was climbing Mont Blanc 7 years ago. I remember being in this French hut, waking up at 2 a.m, getting out. Everyone was extremely rude, pushing, sort of people away. I had someone getting in between myself and my guide on the ladder, really kind of unsafe and insane. And once people got to 4,000 meters, they quietened down. They had to walk slower. That aggression kind of was gone. So I think what it manifests itself in, your heart rate goes to the rabbit's pace, and you can walk only very, very slowly. When you stand up in your tent, you get this sort of jolt. It's like, oh, what's going on? But as the days progress, your body adapts. And again, I was incredibly fortunate to be able to do a lot of high altitude mountaineering in the past 18 months. And that has conditioned my body to keep that storage of red blood cells that facilitate oxygen carriage through the body. But that's effectively what happens. Some people have it in far more severe fashion. If you go very fast, or if you happen to be one of the people who cannot adapt, you develop cough, and that cough, creates or leads to the liquid accumulating in your lungs, and you can develop a very severe condition, pulmonary edema, or you can develop a horrific condition which is rarely salvageable, called cerebral edema. That's when your brain swells, and effectively the only way you can be brought back to life is through injection of steroid and then very, very quick descent.
Now, what about food? Are there any particular foods that you eat more of leading up to a particular expedition to maybe facilitate the extra red blood cells, or do you sort of hone in your diet and nutrition leading up to a particular expedition?
Well, I'm of quite slight build now. I weigh about 52 kilos. So my biggest worry before going on this incredible mountainthon, particularly the combination, from April until June, I skied to North Pole, then went straight to Everest, climbed Everest, and then went to do a technical and extremely, difficult route on Denali called Cassin Ridge. And my biggest worry was weight loss, because you could never replace or replenish the calories that you have, that you use in those conditions, particularly in the cold or at high altitude. You could burn, even with my build, between 4,000 and 7,000 calories a day. There's no way in the world you can haul it behind you in a sled or you can carry it in your backpack. So effectively, you just have to eat and eat quite a bit of balanced diet. But again, when you are on the mountain, your body craves sugar. Your body craves that glucose and carbs. And that's, for a big endurance exercise that comes, that's what you have to load up. I know it's not the healthiest thing, is not what I would choose to kind of load up on a daily basis. I love my vegetables and, nuts and oils, but kind of in those conditions, that's what you do. The other stuff, so you look for compact calories. What are other compact calories? Peanut butter, almond butter, hazelnut butter. That's, a spoonful of that has a ton of calories and it's good, right? It's good for you. Nuts, again, you eat bags of nuts as snacks. And I would just preface of saying that the most important thing while you're climbing is to remember to take that nutrition every 45 minutes to an hour. So think of it as a triathlon or marathon, because once you feel, and I've obviously been in those positions and learned the hard way about it, once you go through that drop in your glucose levels, it's very difficult to recover. And you feel actually, oh, I can't do it. You feel the drop of energy. You think you cannot do something, but in fact, you're hungry. So it's having the gels, the chews. Goop produces fantastic stuff that gives you that very quick release of sugar that helps you, again, to go to the next level.
I know with some of the runs I've done, I've got like a watch where I set, like a recurring alarm, every half an hour or 20 minutes or so, just to sort of remind yourself to eat, because, after a number of hours, you do actually forget to eat, and then, you're losing energy, and it's like just a downward spiral.
For sure. In particular, when imagine it's super cold, like on average summer day. I mean, the very notion that you have these huge gloves and you can reach inside of your pocket and take something out and eat and take your respirator off, right? Your oxygen, and put it in your mouth. That's a major effort that you don't want to make. So that's the story, but you have to do it because otherwise you just run out of fuel. You can't run on empty.
I do want to get right into Everest, but before we do that, I want to talk about the two poles, the South Pole and the North Pole. Was there any one of those two that was more difficult than the other? Or were they both equally
Sure. Difficult? I think they were difficult in different ways. And you master both of them, right? Once you're on the journey. South Pole was difficult because it was I was outside of my discipline. I felt outside of my comfort zone. I'm a climber. I'm of slight build. You have to haul a very big sled behind you. So you need to learn how to pull. And though I've done that on Denali, again, South Pole, the sleds were bigger. And then you had to do it for 10 to 12 hours a day in an environment that is very, very monotonous. So you land effectively on a giant white plate and the horizon seems round and there's absolutely nothing on the horizon. And the only thing that changes during the day is your shadow because the sun transitions, from one side to the other. So you need to not only quieten your mind, but you need to figure out how do you keep pulling and get in the rhythm in order kind of not to exhaust yourself. So you go an hour on, 10 minutes off, an hour on, 10 minutes off. So and that's combined with minus 40 temperatures and often wind. So I remember on our first day, we just had the perfect storm of having all of this horrid things happening. The wind that always blows in one direction. And, it's kind of on day 2 or 3, I figured it out. But I was listening to podcasts, and that was enormously helpful to kind of muster that quietness of mind and put my mind to bay. And then a couple of days on, I wasn't listening to podcasts. I was enjoying that meditative drive. So it's all a question of adjusting. North Pole is very, very different, and I found it fascinating and extraordinary. And if I had to pick the two out of the two, I would definitely pick the North Pole. You're walking on ice. You're walking in a more humid, therefore more cold environment. But it's so extraordinary because you have pressure ridges, right, where the two ice flows would collide and freeze. You have open water leads. You have polar bear prints. And you have that environment that may not be there in 50 years' time as the climate change, unfortunately, brings a lot more ruptures to that ice field. So I found that to be extraordinary. And I was extremely lucky to be with a very, very experienced polar explorer, Eric Larson, from whom I learned a ton. I learned how to set up a tent in that type of environment. You have to use your burners inside of the tent. So it's a huge fire hazard, right? But that's the only way of drying your clothes in that type of very humid, very cold environment. How do you cook? How do you protect your down sleeping bag from soaking that vapor and effectively becoming useless? And what to do about polar bears. So it was an extraordinary journey, and one I would highly, highly recommend.
Did you see any polar bears at all?
We saw the prints. Every night we had to take off our skis and put those skis around the perimeter of the tent. So if the polar bear were to visit, that he would trip and therefore would scare it and go off. We had to have a gun in the tent. We had to have flare guns. And again, that's from a point of self-defense and from the point of scaring the animal.
So you said the North Pole was colder, was it?
Yes, because it's humid. South Pole is a desert. So when you are in the tent, you have lots of UV lights. It's dry, and you actually feel warm inside the tent.
Okay. Yeah, I would have thought the South Pole would have been colder. But so, that's surprising.
It's that humidity. Mm-hmm.
With the South Pole, I've seen footage like just on YouTube that is it sort of uphill? Are you sort of gradually going up?
That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yes, okay. It's about the South Pole is its elevation of about, if memory serves me right, 2,200 meters.
And is there any wildlife at all, like with the South Pole? As you're walking, day in, day out, is it just completely barren, or is there wildlife out there?
And where we were,
like on the South Pole.
Yeah. Where we were on the last degree, it's completely barren. Obviously, as you get close to the ocean, the temperatures are milder, and that's what brings the penguin colonies and otters and other extraordinary creatures that sadly we didn't encounter during those 6 days we were skiing to the pole.
And actually, at the South Pole, the actual South Pole, I believe is a pole there. Is that right? I've seen like a barber's pole.
That's right. There are in fact two poles. There is a barber pole, which is a ceremonial pole, but the actual geographic pole changes every year because of the Earth's movements. So every year, the scientists at the Amundsen Scott Station, which is an American station, make a metal mark that they port to the geographic South Pole. But the two are probably 100 meters apart.
Okay. Now, in terms of the walking distance between when you started off, this is, for the South Pole, to getting to the South Pole, how long did that take you?
Sure. So you ski about 60 nautical miles or 6 to 6 miles. And that took us about 5.5 days. Again, we were very fortunate with the weather apart from the first day, and we were quite fast. North Pole is equal distance, but in the North Pole, the extraordinary thing is the drift, or something that is called the polar treadmill. So you could be doing your, 20 kilometers or 15 miles a day, which is a very good speed. And at the time when you sleep, or while you ski at that point, for that matter, the drift would take you in a different direction away from the pole. Because the ice, you're on the ice, right? You're not on the surface. So again, we were quite lucky with the drift. We didn't encounter any negative drift. We may have gained 5 miles in the course of the journey towards that. So it did take us about 6 days. Now, also with the North Pole, you can't just ski straight because of the open leads. If you're on the water, you could have this extra. It's like skiing through the ice sculpture park, except the sculptures are 2, 3, 4, 5 meters high, and they are huge pieces of ice, and you have a heavy sled behind you. So you have to find your way. So route finding is fascinating, and being with someone who can do that, would facilitate your journey.
So how do you navigate? Did you become an expert at navigation in terms of reading the compass, or did you have some sort of computerized GPS, or how did you navigate?
So the two people I've been with, Rob Smith and Eric Larson, very, very experienced polar explorers, each on obviously different poles. They had a compass in their chest, and they would measure the bearing every morning, because the compass, the other complication is you have magnetic poles, right? So your compass itself will be misguided effectively, right? So they would take the bearing and they would adjust the compass reading for that bearing. And then obviously they would also use GPS at the end of the day to calibrate. With the North Pole, as you understand, it's just a piece of ice that happened to be there on that very point over the geographic GPS point. So there we actually had to walk around for about an hour with a GPS looking for the reading, and it was quite hilarious.
And when you found it, did you check in on Facebook? Masha Gordon checked in at the North Pole.
Well,
did you do that?
Yeah, sadly there is no internet. We sent the Delorme message, and we did a little dance because and we have actually a funny GIF on the website of that. Because it's anticlimactic for a climber that is used to summits, and that feeling is like, oh well, it's here, great, let's get out of here now.
Now, just moving on to the mountains, I believe one particular mountain, I'm not sure which one, but did you climb it with a broken wrist?
That's right. Into my journey on December 30th, I was ice climbing in Italy, so between the climbs, between the South Pole and Aconcagua. And went after ice climbing, I was walking down, grabbed a branch, the branch broke, and I broke my wrist. So that was, to say the very least, extremely unfortunate. And that was the point of having to decide, do I carry on or not, right? So I contemplated surgery, but thankfully I had a very clean fracture. I contemplated, delaying things, but that wasn't possible because each mountain, as you know, has a season. And then I, sat down and thought it through. I was like, well, I had an eye on a very technical route in Aconcagua, but hey, I'm just going to climb the normal route with a cast. And 30 days later, I stood on a summit of Aconcagua without the cast because the base camp doctor insisted on removing that cast, which made me actually very nervous. But yeah, here I was doing that. And that was, to be honest, what really helped me was a memory of wounded warriors being led up Aconcagua as I was coming down the first time. And that thinking that, all these guys who may have not had limbs, who had much tougher time, they did it. So there is no reason why I can't do it with a cast.
Aside from Everest, which one of the mountains that you've climbed has been the most difficult?
There were challenges on a number of mountains. So I did an winter ascent of Elbrus. I've repeated a winter ascent from the year before. And myself and my climbing partner, we decided, because the weather window was very short, we just flew in from Carstensz Pyramid in West Papua. We had literally 24 hours to climb Elbrus before the storm would have shut down the mountain as it did for 2 weeks. And we said, hey, we're going to do it on skis, but let's get a local guy just in case, because this year the conditions are very icy. And I brought a rope, 50-meter rope that you have, so that if you have ice condition, you can, with ice screws, you can, create a belay and make a safe ascent or descent. And sadly, that guy took my rope and he couldn't keep up with us. He was behind us. He couldn't keep up with us on skis. It probably was not his strength or his strong point. And he just disappeared without telling us. So here we were at close to 4,700 meters on sheer blue ice. The two of us at 4 in the morning, realizing we don't have a freaking rope and we have to be on that summit. And that was a point of kind of sitting there saying, what do we do? So because I've been on that mountain before, because my partner was strong, we decided to carry on because we knew that the ice section was about 300 or 400 meters. We had 2 ice tools each. And again, we managed to summit, but it sure was scary. And again, the scary thing is, as I alluded for before in decision making, I would just throw in good money after bad. The most difficult climb objectively was the last climb. I climbed very famous ridge called Carstensz Ridge. Very, very few people have ever climbed it. We were the only group to climb it this year. It's objectively a difficult grade 5, Alaska grade 5 climb. And I could have done the normal route, but I thought, well, it could be a next challenge. Can I do the biggest face in North America, being obviously an amateur climber? If I do it with 2 extremely experienced people, can I do this 39 pitches of this extraordinarily beautiful and elegant alpine route? And I didn't admit to anyone before going that I was doing Carstensz, partly because I think I was intimidated by the prospect. I didn't know conditions. But we did it, and it was one of the most remarkable things I've ever done. We slept on ledges for 3 nights, and we did it, and it was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, that would have been a bit of a big risk doing that, particularly taking the more technical route, particularly if that was the last mountain of the Explorers Grand Slam. Did you sort of take that into consideration?
Sure. I think it goes to show that for me, Grand Slam wasn't about the record. It was about the journey and climbing these beautiful peaks. I am not going to stop, unlike a lot of people who do 7 summits and stop on Everest. So a lot of people who do Everest never climb again. I'm a climber. That's my passion. That's my pastime. Clearly, I had plan B and plan C. Plan B was to climb West Trip, which is, again, a difficult climb, but not as hard. So if conditions on Carstensz wouldn't have been right, we would have done that. And clearly plan C would have been to just run up the normal route. But again, for me, it was the journey. And it's about the same way I stretched myself for the Grand Slam in terms of endurance, sheer endurance. This was stretching myself for endurance on a technical route. And that gave me now lots of desire to try big walls and do it obviously in the company of people who are competent.
Now, just with the internal mountain, that I guess the human spirit, do you find that, is that what you're trying to conquer? Overcoming whatever it is that is within you. Do you find that equally as difficult compared to summiting an actual physical mountain?
Clearly, mountain is a mental exercise. It is about the strength of mind. I was reading last night to my 6-year-old son about Edmund Hillary. And Edmund Hillary kind of admits himself he was not a strong technical climber. He just had it in between his ears, right? He had that toughness. So yes, it's hard, but I think that perhaps is what helped me, someone who was not athletic before, to be able to do this feat. Now, for me, it's a journey, and it was about transition in my life. I changed my work life and work-life balance. And it was about the growth, I think we're going to live very long lives, hopefully, as demographics suggests, unless we perish to a disease or an accident. But so when you think of longevity of your life, you have to be able to reinvent yourself, and you have to be able for that to stretch. And that's maybe the explanation as well why mentally I wanted to do Cassine and see whether, I am very comfortable with extreme exposure, but whether I can do 18-hour days. And Cassine, had required the first day of climbing on Cassine was 18 hours. We slept for 3 hours and went for another 12 hours. And then we slept for 6 hours and then went for another 10 hours. And last day we didn't have food, right? It's what kind of, alpinism or big world alpinism is about. And being able to persevere, carry on, keep yourself motivated, and go through those points of pain is, what is required.
So with mental toughness, do you think you're born, or people are born being mentally tough, or is that something that someone can develop during their life or by being exposed to certain things? Do you think it's something that you're either born with or you can develop, or a bit of both?
I think it's a bit of both, but heavily tilted towards development. Now, outdoors actually is a fantastic way of developing the toughness, and that's what my charity is about. And when I looked into the science of this, we react. The reason why we think we cannot cope with things that are new or scary or threatening is because our body, releases a stress hormone called cortisol. And that, that hormone, effectively switches off the rational part of the brain and makes us, tap in our primary brain. Exposure to intermittent stress through cold, through, not traumatic things, but through hardship that is physical, but then bringing you back in a safe environment, conditions your body not to secrete as much cortisol next time you are exposed to the new or unknown or scary. And to be honest, I've seen that change, take place in my own body over the past 7 months, as I clearly had to deal with minus 40 weather and sleeping in a tent for over 100 days. I got used to being uncomfortable. I am comfortable being uncomfortable. So now when there is a plane delay, like I couldn't fly out of Canberra the other day, I could have freaked out and said, I really want to see my family, and thrown my toys out of the pram. I don't know what people do, right? Or lost luggage. I was very calm. I said, that's great. I'll just go to a hotel and have a very long, comfortable, nice sleep. I think that's that goes to a point. Toughness can be enhanced and harnessed through outdoors, and clearly we can harness it through other ways by asking ourselves to focus and, promising the gifts of the future,
Now, just with the actual Grand Slam, you did Kilimanjaro, like in order. I'm just looking at your website, gritandrock.net. So you did Kilimanjaro, Vinson, the South Pole, Aconcagua, Carstensz, Elbrus, the North Pole, and then the big one, Everest. As you were summiting, as you were going through each of these expeditions and, reaching the summit of all these mountains, was your mind still focused on the big one, Everest? Every time you summited each of these mountains leading up to Everest, was that still in your? Was that sort of the main focus and main objective?
Well, look, there were lots of knowns, right? The knowns were after South Pole. The knowns were things I've done, right? Aconcagua, Elbrus. I have done Denali, so though I was contemplating a much more difficult route, I knew that I could do the normal route. Carstensz was, for me, not a difficult climb. It's, you have fixed rope on a climb that you probably can do alpine style. So clearly the two big unknowns for me were the North Pole and Everest, and more than anything, the combo of the two. As I said, mountains get climbed only in a particular season. North Pole could get skied on only the first 3 weeks of April. It overlaps by 3 weeks, the same 3 weeks, with Everest acclimatization season, because you summit Everest in early May. And for me, the big sort of scary moment was sitting and waiting for the departure for the North Pole. We were in Svalbard in northern Norway, and getting the news that the ice floe where there was a landing strip for the plane has cracked and will take at least 10 days to be repaired. It actually took 12 days. So imagine sitting in Svalbard, where the polar bear population exceeds humans. So 3,500 polar bears roaming around, tiny town, and saying, damn it, what am I doing? I'm tapping, even if this materializes, I am exhausting that time endowment for acclimatization for Everest. I'm a mother. What am I doing? And I gave myself a cutoff date. I said, I have a return ticket on April 15th. If I cannot fly before that and know that I could be done in 6 days, I'm gone. And I said at that point, I remember waking up thinking, I know I'm not going to have Explorers Grand Slam record. I still have a shot at female Guinness record for the 7 summits. And you know what? The life is more dear. The miracle happened. The Russians who manned the Borneo stations have found the ice flow, and it all kind of ended happily. But having that fear that, gosh, it may never happen was something that actually at that point I wasn't thinking about Everest. I was just thinking of what is the prudent thing to do.
What were you feeling when you first saw Everest for the first time with your own eyes? Is it just awe-inspiring, just the size of it and just the energy it emits?
Well, first, it's a great actress, right? It's a she actually. So she doesn't show you the face until you get quite high up. And before you get there, you walk through this extraordinary valley called Kumba Valley. And we walked from Ferice to Lobuche, and these are the areas where you have these monuments to fallen alpinists. And it's incredibly evocative. We were going off season because we were late to the base camp coming from North Pole, so it was empty. And you see, a monument to Scott Fisher. This is the gentleman who died in the movie Everest, and lots of other names. And you just feel like, gosh, I belong to this amazing history. I am one of, now just 400 women that ever summited that mountain. So it conditions you, right? But also shows you that many have fallen. And then you see a little sort of peak, round cap showing behind Nuptse, another grand 8,000 meter mountain. And you feel like, wow, this is it. You get this extraordinary rush. And then as acclimatization from base camp, you walk to the first camp on Pamori, which is a mountain opposite of Everest. And then you see the whole thing and you think, holy moly, there is just no way I can do that last bit, which is the bit from Camp 4 to the top, that 900 meters effectively at that elevation in one day. That's what I think for me was the extraordinary kind of thing to be confronted with. This is like a really big deal. It's steep, it's long, and you are at that point in the death zone.
Yeah, I've heard of the death zone. Where is the death zone? Is that above 8,000 meters?
Yeah, so the death zone starts about 8,000 meters. So think of it as it's like a curve. So altitude gains between 4,000 and 5,000 meters are not as prominent and therefore the changes on your body. But the oxygen loss from 8,000 meters upwards basically goes from a third of what you have on the Earth level to virtually nothing.
Can you step us through, the progression from base camp to Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, and so on? Was there any particular moments that really stood out for you as you were ascending?
Well, absolutely. So just to put things in perspective, I summited Everest within 3 weeks of arriving to base camp. And that's very, very fast. People do it within 6 to 8 weeks. That was obviously because of the North Pole journey being delayed, etc. But I came in acclimatized. So I kind of banked on that acclimatization. And my first rotation, so you do rotations, you go through infamous Kumbu icefall, which has seen obviously the accident that took lives of a couple of dozen Sherpas a couple of years back. You go through that extraordinary ice structure that is constantly moving and shifting through the ladders. And again, the first time I did that felt good. I'm an ice climber, so it seemed okay, reasonable. I made very good time. I traveled up to the Camp 3 on Lhotse phase. I spent about 7 days in Camp 2 at 6,500 meters. So again, very high. Again, forcing stress in my body to acclimatize and acclimatize fast. Felt great, came down. And after about a day and a half in base camp, it became clear that the window that was materializing, the early window, was on May 14th, which was, from memory, 2 weeks from arriving in base camp. And, I was with a climbing partner and, again, we decided jointly that we'll try for that window. He was a strong athlete. And that morning we set out at 1 a.m. with a Sherpa to go up again to Camp 2, rest there for a day, and then move up and try to summit on May 14th. We had an accident in Khumbu Icefall. It wasn't anything tragic, but the ladders that moved because the ice moves, it's a glacier, collapsed. And we had to wait between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. In absolute darkness and cold, stuck on a tiny bridge. And that kind of took my energy. I had only a day and a half of recovery. I've just newly arrived. But, I had that false confidence, I guess, of the great first rotation. And then when we started climbing, it took me forever to get to Camp 2, because once you get out of Khumbu Icefall, the sun hits, and because we were late because of that accident, and the sun just drains your energy. You're on a glacier, so everything, all these UV lights make it very, very hot. And I remember getting to Camp 2 thinking, there's no way I can not only summit now, but boy, I really question whether I'll be able to do it. So my partner went on and tried to summit, and the window ended up not being there, but I stayed on, and I had, first couple of seeing him go and, feeling, just feeling very, very fragile, feeling, gosh, and I'm used to being at least mentally strong and never showing the weakness. But kind of weeping and talking to my husband on the phone saying I have just been introduced to this human condition called fragility. I have no idea how to deal with that. And he was like, well, welcome, to the real world. And then he said, it's not about how you deal, it's not about this condition. It's about how you deal with that. It's with your grit. And he was, clearly doing the tongue-in-cheek reference to my charity called Grit and Rot. And, I was at that point not really having any sense of humor. But, I as I found out on this journey, good sleep, 8 hours sleep really helps. So I went to sleep. I stayed. I rested another day. I ate. And then it kind of the world reacquired colors and I felt stronger. And after 7 days in that camp, I went on and summited the mountain. And, it just puts things in perspective that those levels of energy or the way the altitude affects you, it's variable. And if you pay respect to your body by letting it rest, and rest, as you know, from your endurance training is as important as training, your body will pay off and will adjust and make things possible.
With obviously you go through the physical fatigue. How did you maintain your mental alertness? Did you find that pretty hard? Particularly when you're sleep deprived. I'm guessing dehydrated. You don't have much energy because of you're expending too many calories and you're not getting enough calories coming in. Did you have any particular techniques to remain alert and with it and not sort of lose it mentally?
Well, I'll tell you, you'll smile. When I was climbing Mount Kosi, which was the one I needed to qualify for the Guinness Book of Records, you needed to do 8 summits, not 7. It was a horrid day, and you guys will smile because you think, well, it's a hill. But it was a blizzard. It was a whiteout. It was absolutely soaking wet. I had to continue talking to myself. I was like a mad woman walking to the top of the Kosi, thinking if I stop talking to myself because I'm so frozen, because I had mild frostbite on my feet from Denali, and I felt, obviously my feet felt horrid, I could just lose it and sit down and not to come back, not come back. And what a shame that would be. Yeah. So that's obviously extreme and a bit of a joke, but a real one. In terms of Everest, mental alertness, look, clearly the danger is there, right? So what helps you, I guess, on the summit day, big time, is you have oxygen. So the best way of feeling a bit better is increasing flow, and you can do it intermittently. And that gives you, it's as if you're getting the best, bath in your life. you just get that incredible warmth from that extra oxygen. And that helps, again, cracking it up from 3 liters to 4 liters helps you to come back to senses. And then you obviously have to conserve because you don't know how long your climb may last because of conditions or traffic, human traffic, et cetera. And then it's nutrition. I'm afraid, like the way it's a very, very physical pursuit. So the answer is hydration and nutrition.
And can you maybe talk us through what it was like when you approached the summit and actually got to the top? What was that like?
It was anticlimactic because I have celebrated my own summit on the Hillary step. And the story behind that is that when I arrived to Camp 4, I was looking at the weather forecast, and I was backed by great Kiwi outfit called Adventure Consultants. Those guys have access to great weather. I was sitting in the tent and getting the weather report of 50-mile-per-hour winds. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is non-climbable weather. Here goes my record yet again, right? Like the North Pole. But I teamed up on that summit day with an amazing woman, another Kiwi, Lydia Brady, who was the first woman to summit Everest without oxygen in 1988. She lost her private client a few weeks before. And Lydia is a very, very experienced mountaineer. So she was climbing a mountain for herself. And it was a great match. So we looked at each other and I said, well, Lydia, you have experience. You will know, right, how long it takes to come back if the weather turns. Let's do it. So for the following kind of 8 hours, as we were going up, and that was the day when, unfortunately, we lost 2 climbers because the crowds were so big. As we were going up, as we were overtaking people on the way up, again, to keep the efficiency and keep warm, I didn't know until I reached the Hillary step whether we will have to turn back. So I had that extraordinary pressure, right? Apart from, you walk up, of thinking, gosh, it may not happen. It may not happen. As you get stuck behind some queue, Lydia would look at me and say, gosh, I don't know, Masha, this may take us a long time. And I kept thinking, like, please don't turn back. Yeah. So when I saw Hillary step, and it's a landmark, you think like, is this Hillary step? So I asked Lydia, she's like, yeah. I burst into tears, literally, because I understood it's like 30 minutes away from the summit. I am a summiteer. So when you arrive to the summit, it's very crowded. You stand in the top of the world, but hey, you've had the journey. You've had those views, along the way. And to be honest, the only thing you want to do is to start going down, because clearly you get haunted by stories of lives lost. 80% of lives lost is on that descent.
Up the top there, is there, I've seen documentaries and stuff like that, but are there heaps of prayer flags and what else is sort of up the top there?
People bring mementos. So it's basically a white sugar cone on a ridge. So you see a lot of people standing, trying to take pictures and across the prayer flags. Yeah.
Did you leave a memento up there at all, or?
No, to be honest, I was so keen to go down. I took a small memento from on the way down. I took a little stone to bring down to my kids because I thought it was very, very special to come from the rooftop of the world.
I guess when you're at the top of the world, you'd be thinking, initially you'd be thinking, I've made it. And then you'll be thinking, oh, actually, no, I've only made it halfway. You've got to make it down. Were you thinking that when you're at the top?
Well, of course, because again, on my day, there were probably around 80 Westerners and 120 Sherpas climbing. So 200 people, huge traffic jam. The worst cliches you can imagine, right? So in some way it takes away from the magic of Everest, though not everything. As you go through this very narrow passages, and the last from the south summit to the top, it's a ridge, and a ridge that, drops 2,000 meters on one side and 2,000 meters on the other. Clearly, there is a rope, a fixed line rope, that is there, but everyone who goes up is clipped on it. So when you come down, you need to take your own clip and go around people. So you're unclipped for large part of the journey. And it's scary, though I feel very comfortable with exposure, but it's scary because people that are going up, or people behind you, or people in front of you, they are tired. They may be out of it. Some of them may not make it, right? And you worry that, the accidental move or push will result in a human tragedy. So it is scary.
Have you ever hallucinated through fatigue?
No, I maintained the right mind. No.
Yeah, no, that's incredible what you've achieved. Can you maybe tell us about your charity, the Grit and Rock?
Absolutely. So as I was skiing to North Pole, I was thinking, why can I, a woman who, as a girl, failed PE at school, why can I do this, right, on day 3 or 4 when I felt somewhat sane? And I realized that, as I alluded before, that, I was able to tap in this great endowment we developed, which is mental endurance. And that helped tremendously in outdoors. I also understood that outdoors is a perfect way of honing that. And for kids that, say, are less academic, or kids that may not be as interested in, again, doing it through the means of persevering through the physics book, exposure through outdoors could build the same set of skills. So I set up a charity where we have a pilot program in one of most deprived school districts in the UK, and it's going to take teenage girls aged 12 to 16 through the year-long mountaineering course with weekly meets at the climbing wall, scrambling, and expedition. And again, the idea there is to take those kids that don't have any connection with outdoors, that live on the doorstep of an amazing peak district in the UK, and get them to enjoy walking 10 to 12-hour days through wet English, hilly countryside. And again, through that, understand when you get to the summit, that exhilaration. And it's the subtle messages, your hard work really, really pays off. So that's the story. And we are launching that pilot in September. So I'm very much looking forward to working with those kids on that project.
Yep, no, that's great. What would be your proudest moment on the Explorers Grand Slam? Would it be completing it, or a particular summit, or overcoming a particular low point?
Sure. Well, that fragility point on Everest, it could have broken me. Yeah. But, I was able actually, to rise and to go through. But again, the proudest moment was being able to climb Cassin Ridge on Denali. Okay. And, I had amazing partners, but all three of us, were a challenge, and, it was a challenging exercise. And again, being able, and I guess the pride comes from taking on an extraordinary hard climb at the end of a very long endurance challenge, and being up for that, and seeing the joy in that. And that, in a way, maybe describes kind of the point in life where I got to, that I really, really love doing this. And I want to evolve. I am 42 and I want to continue evolving. Life is not over.
Now, I know, a lot of Ironman triathletes, when they've completed an Ironman, they get the Ironman tattoo. Is there like an Everest tattoo?
Oh, no,
that,
no.
people...
I'm of a different generation, I think. No. I have a friend who has an Everest tattoo, but that's more of a sad story. He lost his partners in 1989 disaster. So for him, It was a way of commemorating his lost friends.
Yeah. Just on advice, if you could make a phone call to the 20-year-old Masha Gordon and give her some advice, what would you tell her?
It would be to get the heck to the start line and stop leaning into that notion that, hey, I can't do this. I wish I endorsed sports and athletics early in my life. And I wish I, had someone who kind of would have given me that message, because it certainly gave me huge amount of endorphins and a great way of distressing from all these things that life could bring and that make us anxious.
And what advice would you give someone who's wanting to summit one of the mountains that you've summited, or even embark on, the 7 summits, or if there's someone out there that wants to embark on some sort of expedition, whatever it may be, what sort of advice would you give them?
do it. But basically understand that it is about low intensity, long duration activity. So start small, focus on small intermediate goals and celebrate early wins. So start with smaller hills, smaller summits. But the key for this type of activity is to be able to do gradual longer days. And I think that that's what made, again, me capable of starting on the journey. I had a low base level of fitness, but over time that got developed. So, and invest in skills. So go on a climbing course, go on an ice climbing course. Again, you don't need to be an ice climber to do that. You just have to have two arms, and two legs. So very much start small. Don't get, don't get intimidated by big climbs or by incredible graceful women or incredible athletic men doing it. You can do it. Just you have to understand it's a journey in the process. Someone asked me the other day how long it took me to prepare for Everest, and I laughed and I said all 7 years, and it's true because I don't know whether I would have been able to do it a couple of years back, right?
Yeah.
It's all this 10,000 hours, and you have to do your 10,000 hours.
Have you got anything planned for the future? Are you sort of working towards something? Are you going to take up something different like golf, or have you got anything planned?
I think I will stick to excelling in what I do. So I'm very lucky to have a place in Chamonix. So I'm going in a couple of weeks to climb Frendo Spur, which is a lovely, very long multi-pitch climb. And I'm going to try to do what is an ultimate dream of mountaineers, to do a first ascent in the fall. Nepal has just opened up over 100 peaks. So I and my Denali partners will be looking into going out there in October, November, and trying to put a new route. And that'll be very, very exciting indeed.
So what is it about mountains that you love?
It transports your soul. It takes your soul, it sets your soul free. You can dream. It gives you this incredible liberation, and you get this point of extraordinary solitude and unity at the same time, unity with the world. It's a flight. It's the closest we can get to when you are on the ridge or when you're on the top of the mountain, to flying, to feeling like a bird. So I guess that it's that point of taking you away from material, from worries, from anxiety, and giving you that sense of ultimate freedom.
It's an incredible story that you've lived, and you've definitely given a lot of inspiration to both girls and guys. And whereabouts can people find you online? Sure.
So you alluded to my website, www.gritandrock.com or .net. I have a Instagram account with amazing pictures from all these journeys. So very much, invite you to follow me on Instagram at Grit, Grit and Rock, Grit and Rock. Twitter, the same handle, and Facebook. You can Google either myself or Grit and Rock and like the page.
Yeah, that's great. I'll definitely be following you moving forward, and keeping an eye out on your Facebook page and all the photos that you post on there. Just wanted to say thanks again for your time today, and good luck with all your adventures in the future.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Yep, cheers.
Cheers.
You've just been listening to the Born to Kick-Ass podcast at borntokickass.com. If you liked what you heard and want more, please subscribe on iTunes, give a 5-star rating and a kick-ass review. This really helps to boost our presence and continues to allow us to introduce you to the most fascinating people on the planet. Welcome aboard, and catch you next time.